And so here it says they were zealous for God, but it wasn't based on knowledge. So it wasn't based on the fear of the Lord, which is what our saying of the wise says in this episode.
Yeah.
That you need to be zealous for the fear of the Lord, zealous for the knowledge of the Lord.
Yeah, because what saves us is God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not our own understanding of Him.
Yeah.
There's not the strength of our faith, because that's why He can say that faith as small as a mustard seed will save you.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
It doesn't matter how strong the faith itself is. It matters what the object of the faith is.
Welcome to Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. I'm Timothy.
And I'm Caleb.
And you're listening to Bible Discussions, the forum where we explore biblical topics that are relevant to your life. Today we're continuing our series on the 30 sayings of the wise found in the book of Proverbs. And this episode, we're going to talk about saying number 14, which is, do not envy sinners. So let's start by reading that in Proverbs 23, verses 17 and 18.
Do not let your heart envy sinners, but always be zealous for the fear of the Lord. There is surely a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off.
So I think this saying is one of the more philosophical ones, Caleb, I guess in the sense that it's not like as plain and obvious what you're supposed to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, other than not envying sinners.
Well, yeah.
That part's pretty plainly stated. But it's not clear. You kind of think like, okay, duh.
Right. Well, I mean, first of all, it says, do not let your heart envy sinners. And when you first look at that, you might think, well, I mean, we all know a sinner is a bad person, and why would I want to envy one? But what it's really saying, though, is don't let your heart do that. Like, you have a conscious choice to make. Your heart can think all kinds of things, as we said recently in some of our other episodes. The Hebrew mind thought that the heart was the center of understanding.
Yeah,
and so it's saying don't let your heart do that. That's something it can do, but you should stop it from doing it.
Well, that's kind of how all sin starts, right? Nobody's just like, I think I'll cheat on my wife, ruin my life, destroy my family. Like that'll be a good thing to do. But you can you can start like looking at people lustfully, and then it'll build from there.
I know there was a wise rabbi that talked about stuff like that back in like first century Palestine.
Yeah,
and said don't even look at a woman lustfully. So yeah, I mean, because nobody wants to be a bad person, right? Or do we?
Well, yeah, that's the problem.
Sometimes we do, right? Maybe I do, because that's what's in your heart, and that's why you shouldn't let your heart begin envying sinners, because that's going to lead your heart in the wrong direction, right?
Yeah.
So it's something you have to guard against. I think that may be what you miss when you just like surface read this. It's like, don't let your heart do that. Okay, I won't. But it's like, no. It's like, don't let your heart do that. This is like, there should be like in the Bible, they should use like modern symbols, like the language, the language indifferent symbols that we have now. Like
on like hazardous materials.
Yeah,
and stuff.
Slippery surface or whatever. They show some guy slipping on his back.
Well, it's like
there should be like a big caution triangle there that's like, don't let your heart do this.
Well, some of them are almost comical. If it's like you're buying like some kind of poison or something, and then they got like skulls and crossbones on the on the bottles.
Like if it's got acid in it, it's got like it's poured on something, and there's fumes coming off it, like it's going to melt.
Some of them have like a picture of somebody like crying in pain.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like your pinch point. It shows like a hand with a gear and like the fingers bent up in the air. Well, I mean, that's what this is really like. When we read it flat, right? We're like, oh yeah, okay, I won't. That's fine. But it's supposed to be shouted at you, kind of like, don't let your heart do this. It's a mess. So, and it actually, go ahead.
Well, we might have been going to the same point there, but you go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say it actually kind of gives you an antidote for it. It's not just don't do that. It's like, here's something to do instead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's also, like you were saying, this is kind of philosophical. It's not that intuitive that this would be the solution. Kind of like when we did that one on I forget which episode this was, but we looked at one of the old church fathers whose recommendation for dealing with anger was to sing the Psalms, and we were like, how many counselors give you that advice today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you do with what is the advice here? It's to be zealous for the fear of the Lord.
Yeah.
And so that's your guard against letting your heart wander into this, bad idea of envying sinners, right?
Yeah, this reminded me of, like, why would that be the antidote? If you're thinking, why is this those are your two choices, and this is the way you combat having an envious heart, or even an envy for like being able to sin. I go back to when we did our 10 Commandments series, and one of the things I brought up was the way that Luther read the 10 Commandments, and each one of them, he said, like, what does this mean? We should fear, love, and trust the Lord, so that we, depending on which commandment it was, so that we, if it's stealing, so that we not only don't steal, but we should fear, love, and trust the Lord, so that we look out for our neighbor's own well-being.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that was what it was grounded in, was fear, love, and trust. And the more I've thought about that, the more that I think that has to be right. And this is reinforcing that here, that the fear of the Lord is what's going to be the antidote to envy or to covetousness, which was one of the commands.
Yes.
That fearing the Lord. Yeah, because if you and as well as that love and trust idea, I often think of it as a trust issue. Like, basically, anytime we are tempted to sin, especially the way this sounds, is kind of looking at somebody who doesn't fear God and is just doing whatever they want, and you think, man, sometimes I'd like to be able to do that. And I think of that as a trust issue. Like, it goes back to the original temptation. Did God really say, that? Did God really promise us? Does He really have promises? Is He really going to keep His promises? Is it worth being faithful, waiting for Him and on His timing? Or shouldn't I just take what I can get now,
Yeah. Well, and it's also, and we haven't talked much about spiritual disciplines, actually. I'm not sure. That might be the first time we've mentioned them on the podcast. But, the spiritual disciplines, in this case, of putting something intentionally, focusing on something intentionally to keep you from sinning, in this case, the fear of the Lord, and meditating on that, praying about that, so that you would keep yourself from temptation, keep yourself from envying sinners. So it's something that you purposefully do to lead yourself in the right direction. Okay, so occupy your heart with something good, right? So that it doesn't envy. Now, like your mom and I, what we did when we were parenting was we would focus you guys on the opposite virtue. Like, if your problem was envying, like you're saying, it's not at all obvious that fear of the Lord is the answer. We would have said, okay, so the opposite of envy maybe is gratitude, being grateful for what you do have. And so we would try to get you guys, if you were struggling with something like that, we would try to get you to focus on being charitable, being, giving, or thankful, for what you already have, so that you don't focus on how can I get more for me,
Yeah.
Try to find things that are great things to put in the place of envy, and gratitude is one of those. So, but we should be being zealous for the Lord anyway, shouldn't we?
Yep.
So it's a good thing to do, whether you're doing it to combat envy or not, right? And probably the problem with us is we start out zealous for the Lord, and then by lunchtime we're zealous for the Lord, and then by dinner time you're like, what's for dinner? Right? So you've forgotten about that zeal, but we've seen over and over again in these sayings of the wise that they try to get you to think long term, right? Like, stop thinking about what's for dinner right now, and think about long term. Where do I want to be? What do I want to do? And you want to be zealous for the Lord, right? You don't want to be envying sinners. So,
right. And then we have the second half of the saying, which we've kind of ignored so far, right?
Which is long term, right?
Yeah, thinking long term, because it's promising there is a future hope. That's what made me think of the whole, like, we trust in God. I find when I'm tempted, to do most things, it's usually because I'm basically not trusting Him to actually have what's good for me, that I need to go and seize it myself.
Yeah, no, that's good, and that's the focus of the second half. You know, there's a future hope. It talks about, well, what is future hope but long term thinking, right? And it reminded both of us, I think, of Psalm 73. Well, we did a whole session on that in our series on who is Jesus Christ and why do I need Him, and it was one of the 4 psalms that we covered, and that's in episode 22. It's called "Draw Near to God." So if you go back to Bible discussions, go back to episode 22. You can watch that entire episode on Psalm 73, but we're going to hit some highlights of it here. So the first 3 verses in Psalm 73, verses 1 through 3 say, "Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." So it starts out with the exact same problem that's presented in this saying of the wise, right?
Right.
So those darn arrogant sinners, I like them so much. I want to be just like them. So, but it is a problem, right? We see people who have nicer cars, nicer houses, nicer boats, and is it because they don't go to church and contribute, some percentage of their income to the Lord's work in the world, if advancing the kingdom? They don't spend their resources and spare time on producing a podcast to make sure that other people understand the Word of God properly, that they're out doing some other money-making thing, or out enjoying all the spoils of life in their boats and cars and houses and vacation houses and all the other things that I don't have. So...
Yeah, man, you really seem tore up about this.
Well, here I am doing it, so it's a spiritual discipline, right?
Well, in the middle, we're not going to read all of Psalm 73. It's fairly long, but in the middle of it, he says in verse 13, "Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and have washed my hands in innocence. All day long I've been afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments." So again, it's like, this is not worth it.
Yeah.
I should just get, the hedonism. Just life's short, so I should just enjoy it while it lasts. Get whatever I can, and then I'm going to die, and that's it.
Well, this is the spiritual disciplines, right? Like washing your hands was a spiritual discipline. It was something God asked you to do to focus yourself on purity. Like in order to remain pure, holiness, right, is being set apart. And so God had given them, dietary laws and other ideas that would help them focus on purity, like not mixing fabrics in your clothing and stuff. Your clothes should all be sewn out of one material. It was emblematic of who you were. You were God's set apart people, pure, right? Yeah. And so God had asked him to wash their hands, and so he was getting tired of it. Like, okay, well, I'm washing my hands, but I don't think they were even dirty. But you told me to wash my hands. I'm washing my hands. But it's just like I was saying a minute ago, there's a bunch of other people in the world who aren't sitting around thinking about some spiritual discipline or something that God asks us to do. They're just out enjoying the spoils of their lives.
Yeah, they seem to be doing fine sometimes.
Yeah.
By the way we would want to measure it.
Yeah, and I mean here, this psalm was written by Asaph, and he's like, I wake up in the morning, and I'm already being punished. But because I got a bunch of stuff I got to do because God wants me to do it. But that's where he is at the beginning and the middle of the psalm, right? But if you get to the end of the psalm, in Psalm 73, verses 27 and 28, it says, "Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds." So it ends, and there's other sections of it in there too that talk about knowing the ends of all things and that God knows them. And we trust him, like Caleb was talking about trust a minute ago. And we put ourselves near him and in his care, because in the long run, he wins. He carries us through, right?
Well, that was the name of the study on Psalm 73. It was draw near to God.
Yes.
And the turning point in the whole psalm is when he says that, "But then I went into your sanctuary."
Yes.
So he goes to be in God's house.
Another spiritual discipline.
And then he realizes this. And so look what it says. Like to tie it back to the second half of the saying for today, where he says, those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. They have no future.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no future.
But we
Yeah.
do have a future hope that will not be cut off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it really is. I just keep going back to that trust thing, like believing in God's promises.
Yeah. Yeah, and occupying yourself with something else like the fear of the Lord, which is obviously present in those last two verses of Psalm 73. Fear of the Lord. I mean, everything's going to be destroyed that isn't close to Him, and you don't have time to sin, right? If you're occupied with the good things that God gives you to do, and then you're just like God because you're occupying yourself with good things, which is what God does.
Mm-hmm.
So. God, He always has a long-term plan, right? Just like these sayings of the wise talk about, thinking long-term. God always has a long-term plan, and you see that specifically in passages like Ezekiel 39, verses 25 through 29.
Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I will now restore the fortunes of Jacob, and will have compassion on all the people of Israel, and I will be zealous for my holy name. They will forget their shame and all the unfaithfulness they showed toward me when they lived in safety in their land with no one to make them afraid. When I have brought them back from the nations and have gathered them from the countries of their enemies, I will be proved holy through them in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God. For though I sent them into exile among the nations, I will gather them to their own land, not leaving any behind. I will no longer hide my face from them, for I will pour out my spirit on the people of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord.
So you see His long-term plan in a passage like this. And even though it's going back and forth between their faithfulness, their unfaithfulness, His punishment, His drawing them back, and their restoration, but it's a long-term faithfulness that God has to carry us through that kind of a lifetime of struggle.
Well, and we've seen that, his punishment is part of his faithfulness, part of his love.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We just looked at that recently.
It's purposeful.
In the difficult episode about disciplining a child, where we pointed out that the Bible teaches that God disciplines those He loves.
Yeah, true.
And we've talked about that before. That famous Jeremiah passage. I know the plans I have for you, the plans to prosper you, not to harm you, is given in the context of predicting the exile, the conquest and exile of Israel.
Yeah,
and so He's faithful even in when we're allowed to suffer and struggle.
Yeah, you see it as described here in Ezekiel, and then you realize, oh, well, it's not just for the history of Israel, right? But of all mankind. Like you see this arc of redemptive history here for Israel, as explained in Ezekiel. But that same arc of God's redemptive plan is for all mankind. And that you see in passages like in the book of Romans, in Romans 10, verses 1 through 3, which says, brothers and sisters, my heart's desire and prayer to God for the Israelites is that they may be saved. For I can testify about them that they are zealous for God, but their zeal is not based on knowledge, since they did not know the righteousness of God and sought to establish their own. They did not submit to God's righteousness. Christ is the culmination of the law, so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes.
So that's such a fascinating and I think frightening passage, because there's a real warning in there. Like he's saying, I can testify about them that they're zealous, and not just zealous. You can be zealous for anything, not just zealous, but they're zealous for God. But their zeal is not based on knowledge. So you could be. This is where it's so important, right? I think, especially in like Protestant circles, we get this idea where sometimes our faith is really in our faith. Like the whole sola fide thing. Sometimes what we're really trusting in is my knowledge of the Bible or of God's salvific plan, and it's really my faith. I have to trust that my faith is strong enough, and that's dangerous. Or even if you might just be misunderstanding everything about God's plan. And so he says, their zeal is not based on knowledge. Now, where exactly do we get knowledge? What's the first step?
Yeah, right. We've studied this several times, several different lessons at Proverbs 1:7, right? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And so here it says They were zealous for God, but it wasn't based on knowledge. So it wasn't based on the fear of the Lord, which is what our saying of the wise says in this episode.
Yeah.
That you need to be zealous for the fear of the Lord, zealous for the knowledge of the Lord.
Yeah, because what saves us is God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not our own understanding of Him.
Yeah.
There's not the strength of our faith, because that's why He can say that faith as small as a mustard seed will save you.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
That's a great point.
It doesn't matter how strong the faith itself is; it matters what the object of the faith is.
Yeah, and well, I'm glad you said that because I don't know if you remember that from your grandfather's funeral, but the minister who preached his funeral.
Man, I don't think I do remember that.
Yeah, when Kenny was preaching my dad's funeral, he was saying that shortly before my dad died, he did make it to church one weekend, and he listened to Kenny's sermon, and he had talked about faith. And after the sermon was over, my dad came up to him and said, "Well, you forgot to mention that faith has to have an object, and the object of your faith is God." And so when Kenny was preaching his funeral, he brought that up in the admonition that my dad gave him, and he said, "So I want to say right now that faith has an object, and the object of faith is God."
Yeah.
And so, but that's right. I mean, the knowledge of God, like Caleb said, if it's as small as a mustard seed, it doesn't matter because your strength of your faith isn't what saves you. It's what you put your faith in, and then that provides all the strength, right?
Right.
Because we all know that different people have different levels of faith and strength, and some people are better at practicing spiritual disciplines than others are. Since we were talking about that, because that can be a matter of pride, right? When you practice spiritual disciplines, well, I pray an hour every day. How many hours do you pray?
You'd be praying on street corners and clinking the coins in the coffers like the Pharisees.
Of course, the correct answer is to say, "Well, I pray without ceasing," but that's interesting. An hour, okay. But at any rate, so Paul, he's giving this warning, right, to the Israelites that they're not following the sayings of the wise. Mm-hmm. That's the way I read that, anyway.
Yeah, they have a misplaced zeal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not just enough to have zeal, as Caleb said earlier. So, all right. Well, there are plenty of other reasons not to envy sinners. we could have the non-ending podcast that just goes on and on about Bible verses about not envying.
Yeah,
sinners.
You could almost fill a book.
Yeah. I have to come up with a catchy name for it, though. Something like Biblocus, but shorter. Okay. So Proverbs 14:30 says, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." So we quoted this verse in episode 53 in our 10 Commandments series on You Shall Not Covet. So we're doing a lot of shout-outs to our past episodes today. But episode 53, You Shall Not Covet. So you've got to train your heart to be at peace with what you have, what God's given you.
Yeah, like envy is covetousness. Right? It kind of makes me think, how Paul says, I forget where he says this, that other sins take place outside the body, but whoever commits adultery sins against his own body. It's kind of like that. Like all the other ones have a physical act, and like we talked about, and like Jesus warns, obviously you can hate, you can murder in your heart, you can lust, you can commit adultery in your heart, but covetousness only happens internally. Like I think that's why it's so sneaky, because there's nothing physical. Like I mean, how many times I'm sure you've heard some guy say this to you before. I've heard it. Like, hey, just because I'm not buying doesn't mean I can't look at the menu. And he's like checking out girls or something, Yeah. It's like, real classy. But it's so easy because all the other ones, there's a really obvious physical act. Like at some point, like, the hand hits the other guy, like something physical happened and you sinned. But envy is all inside. And so it's really easy to lie to yourself and to hide it from everybody else. And that's what it's doing. It's rotting you from the inside out, which is interesting because that's what doesn't he say that in Psalm 73 somewhere? I might
I
be mixing up my
don't
Psalms.
know.
Yeah.
I
We
thought,
weren't going to read the whole thing. So
yeah, no, I don't remember that, but but we did reference it in Psalm 32. Another
oh, yes. Yes.
in
That's what I'm
another
thinking of.
episode.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily say that in the psalm.
That's what I'm thinking of.
But we talked about the corrosive power of sin in episode 21.
Yeah.
In case anybody wants to go watch episode 21, walking in the light. Psalm 32 is the famous David's dealing with his sin, and he says, when I kept silent. Oh, this is Psalm 32 verse 3. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long.
Yeah.
And
And it's in this case, it's not just envy. It's any number of sins.
yeah,
that he's tried
David
to
had
hide.
plenty of sins.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the problem with envy, getting back to envy for a second itself, is that there's always more stuff than you own. I mean, there's we talked about in our Genesis episode, like episode 1, we talked about how God made so much stuff and so many people that you could share it all with, that there's no way, you could spend lifetimes upon lifetimes and not be able to experience everything with all the people that God gave you to share it all with.
Yeah.
And then
that great Chesterton quote that the chief sin is boredom.
because then
How
we
could you be bored?
and then
God,
we
you
sit,
didn't make enough stuff.
well, then we sit around our houses and go, oh, there's nothing to do. Like, what's
Yeah.
on TV? This is boring. So it's just ridiculous.
Well, and Solomon, going back to the envy thing, like even if you get a ton of stuff, Solomon in Ecclesiastes says that the wealthy man's riches have no benefit except for him to look at them. It
Yeah.
just like sits there looking at him. Well, that's all mine now. Whoopee.
Yeah, and then you have all the hangers on. You just watch them eat your food.
Yeah, and as wealth increases, so do those who consume it.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another passage, another famous passage, James 3, verses 13 through 18.
Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness.
So that tells you right there that just having zeal isn't enough, because if your zeal is for all your selfish ambition, then it's not the kind of zeal we're talking about here in either in the Proverbs or any other of these passages.
Right.
So
Yeah, and again, the remedy to envy is occupying yourself with good works, like we pointed out before.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, he comes up with a list of bad stuff, and then he comes up with a list of good stuff, and he says, here's what you should be occupying yourself with. So it's the same remedy that we had in Proverbs, just spelled out a little more.
And he says, right, let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom or knowledge, like we might say. Yeah, so again, you got to start with the fear of the Lord to get that wisdom that gives you the ability to do these good deeds.
Yeah. I like the way that if you look at how he shows the good and the bad view, like the long-term view leads to good and the short-term view leads to bad. Because he says like envy leads to disorder and evil practices, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's the outcome of envy if you follow that path. And then he talks about, well, what if you're sowing peace, like in all these other good things that he talks about, that leads to a harvest of righteousness later, he says. And so that's kind of cool. Like that's why you want to keep a long-term view of things, because, I could follow the path over here of all these short-term things that I want to pursue that's going to lead to this devolving,
the downward spiral.
Yeah. And then I got the situation here with sowing peace and other good things, and that leads to a harvest of righteousness. So think long-term.
Yeah, and I mean maybe the most obvious passage for hammering this home is in Galatians 5:16 through 26.
So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other.
I mean, the list of all the good things you can do there, like everything Paul could, all the bad things. He was like every bad thing he could think of, sexual immorality, impurity, idolatry, discord, all of those things, and then the fruits of the Spirit. It's like everything he could think of, just good and bad in contrast with each other.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's basically our proverb for today, our saying of the wise, expanded out into a couple of paragraphs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, think long term. Think about what fruit you want to bear in your life. You want to bear these good things that are listed in the last paragraph down there at the bottom, or do you want to, get that middle paragraph that talks about all the terrible things that would happen, and you won't inherit eternal life. So that will be your reward. Actually, that's another thing that Jesus would say. If you want to experience these things in this world, that'll be your reward.
Mm-hmm.
If you like long prayers and being seen in public doing them and all that and sitting at the best seats, well, that's your reward.
That's like the worst thing. That's the worst, because then you don't even get all the debauchery. You didn't even have any fun while you were sinning.
Well, sure. Well, I mean, it's kind of like back to the Jacob and Esau thing that you always harp on is like Esau sold his birthright for a soup, and it wasn't even one with meat in it. It's just like lentil soup or something. It's like, man, you got a lousy soup and you lost your inheritance.
Yeah.
So you have no eternal inheritance. In this case, in the Galatians passage, you lose your eternal inheritance to enjoy all this list of things here of these short-term, hedonistic, or sometimes just not even enjoyable, just awful things that you spend your time doing.
Yeah. So you have to work at it to keep your heart pure. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah. That's the spiritual discipline side of it, right? It's not that you're earning your salvation by doing these things, right? It's not like a works-based theology or something, but it's just saying
you are pretty much throwing it away by not working at them.
Yeah. Yes.
Something's going to move into your heart.
Yeah. And we're actually going to talk about this a lot more in our next episode. So tune in for that in the following week. But yeah, it takes a lot of effort to keep your heart pure. Remember this, it started out talking about don't let your heart envy. Mm-hmm. So it's like you're trying to keep your heart pure. And so the practice of spiritual disciplines, that means you don't allow time for your heart to envy. So it's more like a helpful tip from God. Like, hey, if you would occupy yourself with all the good things that I have planned for you, you won't have time for the bad stuff,
Yeah.
So be so busy doing good that you don't have time to do bad. I think it's what I always used to tell you boys. So fill your heart with the Spirit of God, right? And you'll harvest the fruits of the Spirit.
So our wise words takeaway is envy will rot your soul, but those who are content in the Lord have a future hope.
Right. And that captures that long-term thinking that at the end of the proverb for today, talked about that future hope. So, hey, where can you find a group of people who are content in the Lord and looking to Him for their future hope.
On Biblocus?
Oh, well, I hope so. There's only 2 there, though. So, but you could join a community of people like that at a local church.
And our millions of subscribers.
Yeah, over 150 now. But so yeah, we always encourage you to join a local church and find the community that's there, because that's a community of people who are trying to occupy themselves with good things, right? I mean, all of us are subject to these bad things. All of us are subject to falling to sin and, bad behavior. But if you join a group of people who would encourage you to do the opposite and do the right thing, then you're going to fare better. It's a spiritual discipline, going to church. So it's another one of these things that are being discussed here. It's something else to fill your heart with. So, any other thoughts?
Nope.
Okay, well, he's Caleb and I'm Timothy, and thank you for listening to Bible Discussions on Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. Please consider subscribing to our channel to help support our efforts. All scripture quotations, unless otherwise indicated, are taken from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV, copyright by Biblica Inc., used by permission of Zondervan, all rights reserved. This program is copyright 2025 by Timothy Klingerman. God bless all of you.